In the bustling city of Oak Ridge, Officer Greg Hensley was known for his strict adherence to rules. He wasn't the kind of cop who joked around or bent regulations for anyone. People either respected him for his discipline or found him intimidating because he didn't tolerate nonsense. On a humid Tuesday evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Officer Hensley was patrolling one of the busier streets in town when something caught his eye. A sleek black sedan with an expired registration sticker. He signaled the car to pull over and it came to a smooth stop by the curb. The driver stepped out and right away, Officer Hensley noticed how poised she was. She wore a crisp blouse, tailored pants, and carried herself like someone used to commanding respect. Her presence alone made him feel uneasy, though he couldn't quite explain why. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, approaching her cautiously. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The woman nodded calmly. "Yes, officer. My registration is expired. I've been meaning to renew it, but haven't had the chance yet." Her tone was polite, almost too calm, which only added to Hensley's discomfort. Something about her demeanor felt off to him. Maybe it was the way she stood there without flinching, meeting his gaze directly instead of looking away like most people did during traffic stops. Or maybe it was the head wrap she wore, brightly colored and neatly tied. That drew his attention. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt challenged somehow. "Well, ma'am," he continued, trying to sound authoritative, "an expired registration is still against the law. Do you have your license and proof of insurance handy?" She reached into her bag and handed him the documents without hesitation. As he examined them, she crossed her arms and asked, "Officer, may I ask why I was singled out? There are plenty of cars on this road with similar issues, yet none of them seem to get stopped." Her question threw him off balance. It wasn't uncommon for drivers to question their reasons for being pulled over, but there was something different about this interaction. Her voice wasn't confrontational. Rather, it carried a quiet confidence that unsettled him further. Was she accusing him of bias? Did she think he targeted her because of her race? "I'm just doing my job, ma'am," he replied stiffly, avoiding her eyes. But her next comment struck a nerve. "It feels like selective enforcement," she said softly, not raising her voice but making sure her point landed. "And I'd appreciate it if we could resolve this quickly so I can go home." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them grew tense, charged with unspoken accusations and rising frustration. Officer Hensley felt cornered, as though she were mocking his authority instead of cooperating. His face flushed red, and his grip tightened on the clipboard holding her papers. Then, almost impulsively, he blurted out, "Ma'am, I need you to remove that head wrap. It obstructs my ability to identify you properly." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the shock evident in her expression. "This is part of my cultural attire. You're asking me to take it off for no valid reason?" "That's not up for discussion," he snapped back, his patience wearing thin. "If you don't comply, I'll have to escalate this situation." The woman hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Then, reluctantly, she began unwrapping the fabric from her head. Beneath it lay intricate braids styled with care, each strand reflecting hours of effort. Before she could finish, however, Officer Hensley did something unthinkable. He grabbed a pair of scissors from his utility belt and cut straight through her hair. She gasped, stepping back in disbelief as locks of her braids fell to the ground. Tears welled up in her eyes and her hands instinctively flew to her head. "How dare you?" she exclaimed, her composure finally cracking. "Who do you think you are?" But Officer Hensley didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, muttering under his breath about protocol and procedure, leaving her standing there humiliated and furious. What he didn't realize at that moment was that this seemingly ordinary traffic stop would spiral into something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Little did he know, the woman whose hair he had just destroyed wasn't just any citizen. She was married to someone powerful, someone whose influence extended far beyond what he could comprehend. And once word got out about what had happened, It wouldn't just be her life that changed forever. The woman stood frozen for a moment, clutching the remnants of her braids as tears streamed down her face. Her mind raced with disbelief and anger. How could this have happened? She had done nothing wrong, just driven home after a long day, and now she was left standing by the side of the road, humiliated and violated. The officer's car light still flashed behind her, but he was already walking back to his vehicle, seemingly unfazed by what he had just done. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Pulling out her phone, she opened the camera app and began recording. With trembling hands, she pointed the lens at her head, showing the jagged cuts where her once beautiful braids used to be. "This is what happens when you're black in this city," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I got pulled over for an expired registration sticker, which I acknowledged. But instead of handling it professionally, this officer decided to cut my hair off because I questioned him. He didn't even give me a chance to explain. As soon as she posted the video online, it exploded. Within minutes, comments poured in from people expressing outrage, sympathy, and solidarity. Hashtags like "Respect Black Women" and "Justice for Her" started trending on social media platforms. People shared their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement, turning the incident into a symbol of broader systemic issues. By morning, news outlets across the country were covering the story. Protesters gathered outside the Yoram police station, holding signs that read, "Accountability Now" and "Stop Police Brutality." Reporters camped out near the precinct, eager to get statements from both sides. The pressure mounted quickly, and the police department scrambled to respond. Meanwhile, the woman returned home, still reeling from the events of the night. Her husband, who had been waiting up for her, immediately noticed something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, concern etched across his face. When she recounted the entire ordeal, the traffic stop, the argument, the scissors, he listened silently, his jaw tightening with every word. When she finished, he sighed heavily and looked at her. "Do you realize who I am?" he asked gently. Placing a hand on her shoulder, she shook her head, too overwhelmed to process anything else. "I'm the mayor's chief advisor," he explained. "And this changes everything." At first, she didn't fully grasp the implications. Sure, her husband worked closely with the mayor, but how did that affect what had happened to her? Then it hit her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about power dynamics, accountability, and exposing deep-rooted biases within institutions meant to serve everyone equally. The next day, the mayor herself called an emergency meeting. Sitting in the conference room alongside her husband, the woman felt a mix of emotions: anger, fear, and a growing sense of purpose. The mayor, a seasoned politician known for her no-nonsense approach, wasted no time addressing the issue. "This is unacceptable," the mayor declared firmly, looking directly at the woman. "No one deserves to be treated this way, especially not by someone sworn to protect them. We will launch an independent investigation into this officer's conduct, and we will hold him accountable." The woman nodded, grateful for the support, but also aware that words alone wouldn't fix the damage done. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also realized she had a unique opportunity to make a difference, not just for herself, but for countless others who had faced similar injustices. News of the mayor's involvement sent shockwaves through the community. People speculated about whether the officer had any idea who he was dealing with when he made the reckless decision to cut her hair. Some wondered if he'd acted out of ignorance or malice, while others debated whether this was simply another example of ingrained prejudice within law enforcement. For the officer, things spiraled out of control almost immediately. By the time he arrived at work the following morning, whispers filled the halls of the precinct. His colleagues avoided eye contact, unsure of how to react. Rumors swirled about the identity of the woman whose hair he had destroyed, and panic set in when he learned she was connected to the mayor's office. He tried to defend himself, insisting he had followed protocol and acted in self-defense when he felt disrespected. But even his closest co-workers struggled to justify his actions. Cutting someone's hair during a routine traffic stop? It sounded absurd, even to those who wanted to believe he hadn't meant harm. Public outrage only intensified as more details emerged. Activists demanded not only justice for the woman, but also sweeping reforms within the police department. Calls for mandatory cultural sensitivity training, stricter oversight, and harsher penalties for misconduct echoed loudly throughout the city. For many, this incident was the tipping point, a clear example of why change was so desperately needed. Back at home, the woman spent hours reflecting on what had happened. She thought about the countless times she had been underestimated or dismissed because of her race. She remembered the stares, the microaggressions, the subtle reminders that she didn't belong in certain spaces. And yet here she was, married, to a man who advised the mayor, living proof that success didn't shield her from discrimination. Despite the pain and humiliation, she felt a spark of determination ignite within her. This wasn't just about her hair, it was about dignity, respect, and equality. If sharing her story could help prevent others from experiencing similar injustices, then she owed it to herself, and to them, to speak up. As the days passed, the momentum continued to build. Protests grew larger, drawing attention from national media outlets. Celebrities and influencers joined the conversation, amplifying the message and keeping the spotlight firmly fixed on the need for reform. Even politicians who rarely weighed in on local matters found themselves compelled to comment, knowing the public's eyes were watching closely. Through it all, the woman remained at the center of the storm. Though she never sought fame or recognition, she understood the weight of her position. This was her moment to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough, because of the color of their skin. Little did she know this was only the beginning. The pressure on the city was mounting, and the police department found itself under intense scrutiny. Every move they made, or didn't make, was dissected by the public, the media, and activists demanding answers. The officer involved in the incident, whose actions had sparked outrage across the nation, became a lightning rod for criticism. He was suspended without pay pending an internal investigation, but that wasn't enough to quell the growing anger. Protesters gathered daily outside the police station, chanting slogans and holding up signs with images of the woman's damaged hair, alongside messages like, "Respect our humanity," and "Enough is enough." Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Officers whispered among themselves, some defending their colleague while others distanced themselves entirely. The man at the center of the storm walked into work one morning, his face pale and drawn. His hands trembled as he held onto the suspension letter he'd received. He hadn't slept properly since the incident. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the shock, the tears, the disbelief. It haunted him, though he still struggled to fully grasp why everyone seemed so furious. Meanwhile, the woman whose life had been turned upside down continued to navigate the whirlwind of attention surrounding her. She woke up each day feeling a mix of emotions: sadness over what she'd lost, frustration at how casually her dignity had been stripped away, and a growing determination to use her platform to push for real change. Her husband, who worked closely with the mayor, encouraged her to speak out. "Your voice matters," he told her gently. "People are listening now. Don't let this moment pass without saying something meaningful." It wasn't long before the mayor called another press conference. This time the woman stood beside her, resolute and composed despite the turmoil she felt inside. Cameras flashed as reporters jostled for position, eager to capture every word. The mayor stepped forward first, her tone firm and unwavering. "This is not just about one individual or one mistake," she began, addressing the crowd. "This is about accountability, respect, and ensuring that no one else has to endure what happened here. We cannot stand idly by while systemic issues persist. That is why we are launching an independent investigation into this officer's conduct. And if wrongdoing is proven, and I believe it will be, we will take swift and decisive action." When it was the woman's turn to speak, she took a deep breath and looked directly into the cameras. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today talking about something so personal and painful," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. But here I am because silence isn't an option. What happened to me wasn't just disrespectful, it was dehumanizing. No one should have to go through that, especially at the hands of someone who swore to protect them. Her words resonated deeply with the audience. Many people nodded in agreement, wiping away tears as they listened. Others clapped and cheered, moved by her courage. Social media erupted once again with hashtags like "Her Voice Matters" trending worldwide. People shared her speech, praising her for turning her pain into purpose. For the first time since the Yao incident, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for herself but for the possibility of creating lasting change. As the days went on, the fallout from the incident continued to ripple through the community. Local leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss police reform, inviting residents to share their experiences and ideas. Activists pushed for policy changes, including mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all officers, stricter penalties for misconduct, and greater transparency in investigations. Even businesses joined the conversation, pledging support for diversity initiatives and offering resources to help educate the public. Amidst all the chaos, the officer tried to defend himself. In interviews, he claimed he had acted out of fear and confusion, insisting he hadn't intended to hurt anyone. "I didn't mean to cause harm," he said repeatedly, his voice trembling. "I thought I was following protocol. I didn't know who she was. I didn't realize how serious this would become." But his explanations fell flat. Critics argued that his lack of awareness was precisely the problem. Whether intentional or not, his actions reflected deeper biases embedded within the system. Sympathy for him dwindled quickly, replaced by calls for justice and accountability. Some even suggested he resign altogether, believing his presence on the force undermined trust between law enforcement and the community. For the woman, the weight of everything was overwhelming at times. There were moments when she wanted to retreat, to shut off her phone and hide from the world. But she reminded herself why she couldn't. Too many people were counting on her to keep speaking up, to keep pushing for change. Friends and strangers alike reached out to offer their support, sharing stories of their own encounters with discrimination and thanking her for giving them a voice. One evening, as she scrolled through social media, she came across a post from a young girl. The caption read, "Because of you, I know my worth." Attached was a photo of the girl smiling confidently, her natural hair styled beautifully. The woman stared at the image, tears welling up in her eyes. In that moment, she realized the impact of what she was doing extended far beyond herself. She wasn't just fighting for justice, she was inspiring others to embrace their identity and demand respect. Back at the police department, the investigation dragged on. Evidence was reviewed, witnesses were interviewed, and reports were filed. The process felt painfully slow to those waiting for answers, but it was necessary to ensure fairness. Behind closed doors, discussions about potential reforms heated up. Some officers resisted the idea of change, clinging to old ways of thinking. Others recognized the need for progress, acknowledging that rebuilding trust with the community required more than lip service. It required action. The woman kept busy during this time, throwing herself into advocacy work. She partnered with local organizations to host workshops on racial equity and self-care. She spoke at schools, churches, and community centers, encouraging people to use their voices and stand up against injustice. Each event brought new connections, new insights, and renewed motivation to keep going. Despite the challenges, she remained hopeful. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but she could see glimpses of progress, a shift in attitudes, a willingness to listen, a growing understanding of the importance of representation and respect. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't stop until things were different, not just for her, but for everyone who deserved better. As the investigation dragged on, tensions in the city continued to simmer. The woman at the center of the storm found herself caught between two worlds, the private pain of her experience and the public fight for justice. Every day brought new, developments, some hopeful, others disheartening, but she refused to let the weight of it all crush her spirit. She knew that staying silent wasn't an option, not when so many were counting on her to keep pushing forward. One afternoon, a letter arrived at her doorstep. It was from the police department inviting her to participate in a private mediation session with the officer who had cut her hair. At first she laughed bitterly. Mediation? What could possibly come from sitting across the table from someone who had treated her with such blatant disrespect? But then she thought about it more deeply. Maybe this was her chance to confront him directly, to make him understand the gravity of what he'd done, not just to her, but to countless others who looked like her. She agreed to attend, though reluctantly. Her husband urged her to prepare, emotionally, warning her that the meeting might be difficult. "You don't have to forgive him," he said gently, "but maybe hearing his side will help you find some closure." The day of the mediation arrived and she dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made her feel strong and confident. As she walked into the small conference room where the session was being held, she spotted the officer immediately. He sat, slumped in his chair, his face pale and drawn. For a moment their eyes met, and she saw something unexpected in his expression. Fear, not anger or defiance, but genuine fear. He stood up awkwardly as she approached, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his hands. "I wrote this for you," he stammered, holding out the letter. She hesitated before taking it, unsure if she even wanted to read what he had to say. But curiosity got the better of her, and she unfolded the page slowly. "I'm sorry," the note began. "I never meant to hurt you. I acted out of fear and frustration, and I didn't think about how my actions would affect you. Please believe me when I say I regret what happened that night. I hope one day you can forgive me." His words were clumsy and lacked depth, but they seemed sincere. Still, she felt conflicted. An apology on paper was one thing, true understanding was another. She folded the letter and placed it on the table between them, then took a seat. For a while, neither of them spoke. The mediator, a calm and neutral third party, encouraged them to share their perspectives. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath and began speaking, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "You took something from me that night," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "It wasn't just my hair, it was my dignity. You treated me like I was less than human, like my feelings didn't matter. Do you even realize how much harm you caused?" The officer nodded quickly, his hands trembling. "Yes, I do now," he admitted. "At the time, I wasn't thinking clearly. I felt disrespected and I reacted poorly. I know that's no excuse, but I'm truly sorry." She studied him closely, searching for any sign of insincerity. His body language suggested vulnerability. His shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the floor. Whether or not he fully understood the magnitude of his actions, she couldn't tell, but she decided to push further. "Do you know why people are so angry about what you did?" she asked. "It's not just because of me. It's because your behavior reflects a bigger problem. A system that allows people like you to abuse their power without consequences. Until we address that, nothing will change." Her words hung heavy in the air. The officer swallowed hard, visibly shaken. "I see that now," he murmured. "I never realized how my actions fit into a larger pattern. I promise I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." The rest of the session passed in a blur. They talked about accountability, empathy, and the steps he needed to take to rebuild trust. Not just with her, but with the community he served. By the end, she felt drained but oddly lighter, as though a small burden had been lifted. Forgiveness wasn't easy, and she wasn't ready to offer it completely, but she left the meeting with a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, this man could learn from his mistakes. Outside the conference room, reporters waited eagerly for updates. She ignored their questions, focusing instead on the road ahead. While the mediation had been a step in the right direction, she knew there was still much work to be done. The mayor had already announced plans for sweeping reforms within the police department, including mandatory cultural sensitivity training and stricter oversight measures. Activists were pushing for even more changes, demanding transparency and accountability at every level. The officer, meanwhile, faced mounting pressure. Though the mediation had gone somewhat smoothly, public opinion remained divided. Some believed he deserved a second chance, while others argued that his actions warranted immediate termination. Legal proceedings against him were underway, and prosecutors were considering charges ranging from assault to violating civil rights. Despite the chaos surrounding him, the officer seemed determined to make amends. He began attending community meetings, listening quietly as residents shared their frustrations and fears. He volunteered at youth outreach programs, working alongside teenagers to repair relationships strained by years of mistrust. His efforts drew mixed reactions. Some praised his willingness to change, while others dismissed it as a PR stunt. But he persisted, knowing he had little choice if he wanted to salvage his reputation. Back at home, the woman reflected on everything that had transpired. She thought about the young girl whose photo she'd seen online, the one who said, "Because of you, I know my worth." That image stayed with her, a reminder of why she couldn't give up. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't fast. But every small victory mattered. Every voice raised in protest added fuel to the fire. She threw herself into advocacy work with renewed energy, organizing rallies, speaking at events, and collaborating with local leaders to draft policy proposals. Her message was simple yet powerful. Respect and dignity should never be negotiable. People of all races, genders, and backgrounds deserve to live free from fear and discrimination. And if achieving that goal required uncomfortable conversations and difficult decisions, so be it. As weeks turned into months, the city began to transform. Conversations about race and policing became part of everyday life, sparking debates and inspiring action. Schools introduced lessons on racial equity. Businesses pledged support for diversity initiatives, and law enforcement agencies implemented new protocols aimed at fostering trust. None of these changes happened overnight, but they represented progress, and that was enough. Through it all, the woman remained steadfast, using her story to shine a light on the injustices others often overlooked. She knew the battle was far from over, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Countless voices joined hers, creating a chorus of resilience and hope. Together, they were proving that even in the face of adversity, change was possible, one step at a time. The trial finally arrived, and the city held its breath. For weeks, the courtroom had been packed with spectators, activists, journalists, community members, and even curious onlookers who wanted to witness history unfold. The air was thick, with tension as lawyers prepared their arguments, witnesses waited anxiously to testify, and cameras clicked outside, capturing every detail for the evening news. On the first day of proceedings, the woman took her place in the front row alongside her husband and a close-knit group of supporters. She wore a bright yellow dress, a bold choice meant to symbolize hope and resilience. Her presence commanded attention, not because she sought it, but because her story had become a beacon for so many others. As she sat there, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about setting a precedent, sending a message that no one, not even those in positions of authority, was above accountability. The prosecution began by presenting a mountain of evidence. Dashcam footage from the officer's patrol car, photos of her damaged hair, and testimonies from eyewitnesses who had seen the incident unfold. Each piece painted a damning picture of a man who had let his ego override his duty to protect and serve. One witness described how they'd watched in horror as the officer grabbed scissors and cut through her braids without hesitation. Another recounted how the woman had stood frozen afterward, tears streaming down her face, while the officer walked away as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. When it was time for the defense to present its case, the officer took the stand. Dressed in a suit that seemed too big for his slouched frame, he looked nervous but determined. His lawyer argued that his actions stemmed from fear and confusion, not malice. He made a mistake, the attorney insisted. But does one poor decision define a person? Shouldn't we give him a chance to learn and grow? The woman listened intently, her expression unreadable. Part of her understood the argument, the idea that people could change, but another part couldn't ignore the harm he'd caused. It wasn't just about cutting her hair, it was about the message his actions sent to the world. If someone in uniform could behave this way and face minimal consequences, what hope was there for real change? After hours of testimony, it was finally her turn to speak. Stepping into the witness box, she felt a rush of nerves but pushed them aside. Taking a deep breath, she began recounting the events of that fateful night. The traffic stop, the argument, the moment he pulled out the scissors. Her voice wavered, at times, especially when she described how violated she'd felt as chunks of her carefully styled hair fell to the ground. But she remained composed, refusing to let her emotions overshadow the facts. "I didn't deserve to be treated that way," she said firmly, looking directly at the jury. "No one does. What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of disrespect, of dehumanization, of systemic issues that need to be addressed. I'm here today because I want justice, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been made to feel less than human." Her words resonated deeply with the courtroom. Several jurors nodded in agreement while others wiped away tears. Even the judge, known for his stern demeanor, seemed visibly moved. When she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause, though the bailiff quickly called for silence. As closing arguments wrapped up, the jury retreated to deliberate. Hours passed, then days, as they weighed the evidence and debated the appropriate verdict. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans. Some prayed for justice, while others expressed skepticism, fearing that the system would fail once again. Finally, after 3 agonizing days, the verdict came in: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers and the woman exhaled sharply, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. Justice had been served, at least partially. While the officer faced penalties for his actions, including the loss of his badge and a reduced sentence due to his willingness to undergo rehabilitation, the larger fight for systemic reform was far from over. In the aftermath of the trial, reactions were mixed. Supporters hailed the outcome as a victory, proof that change was possible when people stood together. Critics, however, pointed out that punishing one individual wouldn't fix the underlying problems within law enforcement. They argued that true progress required more than accountability. It demanded structural changes, policy reforms, and a cultural shift within institutions meant to serve everyone equally. For the officer, life became a series of humbling lessons. Stripped of his position, he began volunteering at youth outreach programs, working alongside teenagers to repair relationships strained by years of mistrust. He attended counseling sessions to confront his biases and educate himself on racial equity. Though some dismissed his efforts as performative, others saw glimmers of genuine remorse in his actions. Whether he truly changed remained to be seen, but at least he was trying, a small step toward redemption. Meanwhile, the woman continued using her platform to advocate for broader reforms. She founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct and promoting diversity within law enforcement. Her work earned her widespread recognition, and she became a trusted voice in the movement for racial justice. Schools invited her to speak at assemblies, businesses sought her advice on creating inclusive environments, and policymakers consulted her on drafting new laws. One evening, as she scrolled through social media, she came across a post from a young boy. Attached to the caption, "Because of you I know my voice matters," was a photo of him standing proudly, his afro styled high and full of confidence. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at the image. In that moment, she realized the ripple effect of her advocacy extended far beyond herself. She wasn't just fighting for justice. She was inspiring others to embrace their identity and demand respect. Back at the police department, changes were slowly taking shape. Mandatory cultural sensitivity training became standard for all officers, and stricter oversight measures were implemented to ensure transparency. Community leaders collaborated with law enforcement to rebuild trust, hosting town halls and workshops aimed at fostering open dialogue. Progress was slow and setbacks were inevitable, but the momentum was undeniable. Through it all, the woman remained hopeful. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Countless voices joined hers, creating a chorus of resilience and determination. Together, they were proving that even in the face of adversity, change was possible. One step, one conversation, one act of courage at a time. Months had passed since the trial, and life in Oak Ridge began to settle into a new rhythm. The verdict had sparked both celebration and reflection, a reminder that while justice had been served in this one case, the work of healing and reform was far from over. For the woman at the center of it all, the journey had transformed her in ways she never expected. She wasn't the same person who had stood frozen by the side of the road that humid evening. She was stronger now, more determined and fiercely committed to using her voice for good. Her nonprofit organization quickly gained traction, drawing support from across the country. People donated money, time, and resources to help her mission grow. Schools invited her to speak about self-worth and resilience. Businesses sought her guidance on creating inclusive environments, and policymakers consulted her when drafting legislation aimed at improving police-community relations. Her calendar was packed, but she didn't mind. Every meeting, every speech, every workshop felt like another step toward meaningful change. One afternoon, she visited a local high school to talk to students about activism and advocacy. As she walked into the auditorium, she was greeted by rows of eager faces, some nodding along as she spoke, others scribbling notes furiously. When she finished her presentation, a young girl raised her hand hesitantly. "How do you stay brave?" The girl asked softly. "What if people don't listen?" The question caught her off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it hit so close to home. She thought back to the night everything changed, the fear, the anger, the uncertainty. And then she smiled. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," she replied gently. "It means doing what's right even when you are scared. Sometimes people won't listen, and that can be frustrating. But if you keep speaking up, someone will hear you eventually. And once they do, they'll pass your message along until it reaches everyone." The girl nodded thoughtfully, and several other students chimed in with their own questions. By the end of the session, the room buzzed with energy. It was moments like these that reminded her why she kept going, because even small conversations could plant seeds of hope and inspire action. Meanwhile, the former officer continued his efforts to rebuild trust within the community. Volunteering at youth outreach programs became a regular part of his routine. He spent hours mentoring teenagers, listening to their stories, and learning about the challenges they faced. Some were hesitant to engage with him at first, wary of his past actions, but he persisted, showing up week after week until they began to see him differently. At one program, a teenage boy approached him cautiously during a break. "Why'd you do it?" the boy asked bluntly. "Why'd you cut her hair?" The question caught him off guard, but he answered honestly. "I messed up," he admitted. "I let my fear get the best of me, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I'm here now because I want to make things right, not just for her, but for everyone I've let down." The boy studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "Okay," he said simply, then walked away. That brief exchange stayed with the officer, a reminder that earning forgiveness took time, and that it wasn't guaranteed. Back at the police department, changes continued to unfold. Mandatory cultural sensitivity training became a cornerstone of the force's operations, with officers required to attend workshops led by experts in racial equity and implicit bias. Community leaders collaborated closely with law enforcement to host town halls where residents could voice concerns and share ideas for improvement. Transparency measures were implemented, including body cameras for all officers and public access to disciplinary records. These reforms weren't perfect, and there were still moments of tension between the community and the police. But progress was undeniable. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. One conversation, one policy change, one act of accountability at a time. For the mayor, the incident served as a catalyst for broader systemic reforms. She championed initiatives aimed at addressing inequality in education, housing, and healthcare, recognizing that true justice extended beyond policing. Her leadership earned her widespread praise, and she announced plans to run for re-election, promising to continue pushing for meaningful change. As for the woman, her story became a symbol of resilience and empowerment. She appeared on national television shows, sharing her experience and advocating for systemic reform. Celebrities and influencers amplified her message, helping spread awareness about the importance of respecting Black women and combating racial injustice. Artists created murals in her honor, depicting her standing tall with her head held high, a testament to her courage and determination. But despite the accolades, she remained grounded. Success hadn't changed her core values or her commitment to the cause. If anything, it deepened her resolve to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for future generations. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, she reflected on how much had changed since that fateful traffic stop. She thought about the young girl whose photo she'd seen online, the one who said, "Because of you, I know my worth." She thought about the students she'd spoken to, the activists she'd partnered with, the countless voices joining hers in the fight for justice, and she smiled, knowing that her pain hadn't been in vain. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't fast. But every small victory mattered. Every voice raised in protest added fuel to the fire. Together they were proving that even in the face of adversity, transformation was possible. One step, one conversation, one act of courage at a time. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, she whispered to herself, "We're getting there."